Hi, and welcome to The Expeditionist. I'm Ralph Iantosca. I consider myself a travel veteran, having been in the industry since 1990. I want to share some really great conversations with some of my travel partners who I just adore. I want to show you a much different way to travel, enjoying local cultures, wildlife, conservation, and sustainability. I want to give you access to a whole new world just waiting for you to have us help you explore. Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Expeditionist. I'm Ralph Iantosca, and this is episode number 3. Today, I have a very special friend on the podcast, James Currie with Great Plains Conservation. Hi, James.
Hi,
Welcome.
Ralphie. Do you mind
Hi.
if I call you Ralphie?
No, that says we're really great friends. So, yes, Ralphie is here. Yeah. So, James, I want to bring a fresh perspective with this podcast to all the listeners that are tuning in. And we've been friends for many, many years, and we love Africa with all of our hearts, and you're South African. What is the DNA and the makeup of Great Plains Conservation? Most people have never heard of this.
Yeah, so I think it's all in the name, Ralph. Great Plains conservation. When people think of the Great Plains portion of the name, they might think of somewhere in the United States, the Great Plains of the United States, but actually it refers to the great open plains of Africa that are in so need of conservation. And that's where the second part of our name comes in, the conservation part. You know, we obviously run ourselves as a business, but we channel almost all our profits straight back into conservation and community development across Africa. And so we're using a very successful ecotourism business model to expand the green frontiers in Africa and take care of endangered species like big cats, elephants, rhinos, etc., through the work that we do. So I think that, maybe not enough travelers realize that when they do travel to Africa, if they travel with responsible suppliers, of which you only partner with, then they are making a massive difference just by going to Africa because their dollar is going so far in making a massive difference on a continental level, on the continent of Africa.
I love being able to spend money and have it go somewhere, right?
Right.
So I feel like today everything's about a shareholder. I was talking on the other podcast to some others recently about how it's all about the shareholders, and it just all seems so boring to me, and it's all duplicated and replicated. And I know the word authentic is used quite a bit, and there's not another word that I have found yet, but we want something meaningful and powerful when we travel and inspirational. And I think when you had me over, my first trip was to Kenya with your camps, and I had been to one of them before. It was a Great Plains camp, Danyawas, which I think is very special in Cholula Hills. But I really love everything that you guys do and the way that you do it. And I think that they're very special. And I think, for example, we could talk about going into the Maasai Mara in Kenya. Maybe you could share with our listeners what would be different about staying at your properties out there versus staying in the Triangle, for example.
Yeah, sure, Ralph. So, look, one of the biggest challenges facing the country of Kenya and indeed many parts in Africa, including the Serengeti and parts of Tanzania, is is the scourge of over-tourism. And unfortunately, I'm sure you've seen this online if you've been on Instagram or whatever, but these terrible videos of 100 vehicles around a
I
mom
can't do
cheetah
it.
and
I
yeah, a
can't
mom
do it.
cheetah
No.
and cubs or cheetahs hunting. So that is a huge problem in places like the Maasai Mara. And obviously we are we are prevalent and we are present in those ecosystems. So it's up to us to try and effect some change at a local government level and a national government level in those countries to stop over tourism. What the
What's going to
difference is
happen
with
with the new jet runway going in? They're building that big new runway that's going to take jets. What's going to happen now?
goodness knows, I think there's in a lot of cases money talks, unfortunately, in these governments, and it's really important to realize that look, you can look at the short-term gain of having a big runway or building a 100-room hotel right in the migration route crossing in the Masai Mara. You can do those things, but the damage to your long-term reputation is massive. So
Hmm.
I would encourage African governments to look at the long term versus the short term. But to answer your question regarding our camps, our camps, we're very lucky in that the majority of our camps in Kenya, in fact, all of them sit in private on private land or in private conservancies. So we're able to offer our guests um, the opportunity, yes, to go into the National Reserve in high season to see the wildebeest migration or wherever it is. But then, once you've seen that, to be able to get out into the private conservancies where, the sightings are limited to 5 vehicles, they're very well controlled. The sort of the grazing by the Maasai people who have always lived amongst wildlife there is very well controlled with the local communities. And you can then have that private experience with African wildlife in those private conservancies versus staying at a lodge inside the reserve where you're forced to deal with those crowds day in and day out.
I think one of my most memorable experiences was in your accommodations too. I was very overwhelmed by how luxurious they were. Even your most simple accommodations, I loved with all my heart. I thought it was really, really fun, and very innovative and thoughtful. And I think what I loved most was the tent that we had. The unit was massive, but it was on the bend of the river. So we had hippos underneath us all night long, which I thought was really cool. And the views right into the Mara were just spectacular. I love the food and the service, but for someone who's never been on an African safari, would you be the ideal fit? Would you be perfect for the first timer? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. The nice thing about our portfolio of camps is that we have two different levels of camps. We have an explorer level camp, which is more for people that kind of like getting out there, getting their feet on the ground. They're a little bit more rustic, the camps. When I say that, they're still upper 4-star camps, beautifully appointed in great wildlife areas. The rooms are just smaller and they don't have things like private plunge pools and that kind of thing that the reserve level camps offer. So I think, within our portfolio, there's something for everybody. And whether you're a first timer or a repeat traveler to Africa, you can always look at the explorer level camps versus the reserve level camps. And a lot of people actually combine both. So they'll start off at a reserve level camp and then end off at an explorer at a sorry, they'll start an explorer level camp and end off at a reserve level camp because that way you get to kind of get that feeling. The explorer level camps are closer to the ground in most cases. They're smaller tents. So when an elephant comes by at night and brushes itself up against the tent, I mean, you feel like you're right there. But then
Wow.
yeah, you're right there. But then you can finish off at a reserve level camp where the camps are raised on elevated boardwalks. You're a little bit more separated from the wildlife experience so that you can get a good night's rest. But for some people, it's really exciting to be at ground level and have hippos and elephants walk past your tent at night, and sometimes lions. You remember
Yeah,
the camps are not fenced, so you get that real great sort of
a real
early
safari.
explorer feeling in Africa.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I love that very much. I love photography very much. And the other thing I wanted you to share with others is your photography program. I think that's pretty spectacular of what you guys offer.
Yeah, so at all our reserve level camps, we have a camera kit in every single room, and that is a really nice brand new sort of Canon camera with a zoom lens and a smaller lens as well, and it's in a nice Pelican case, a big sort of hardened case that you can take with you on game drives. That means you don't need to carry all this weighty, heavy, expensive camera equipment with you on your journey with us. You get access to that camera equipment in your rooms while you are there. And at the end of your stay, you're given basically a flash drive with all your images and your videos on that. As well as that, a lot of our camps, you stayed at Old Donyo. It's got two beautiful, what we call hides in Africa, but probably more familiar in American terms to call them blinds. Um, but we've got two hides there. It's a sunken hide, so you're looking out at ground level at elephants and eland and giraffe coming down to drink from the watering hole with Mount Kilimanjaro in the background. And you're getting these stunning photographs with elephants framed in the front and Kilimanjaro framed in the background. And then you go to places like Botswana, for example. Our boats are equipped with photography mounts on each of the boats, swivel mounts that you can move your cameras with. So we really do take a lot of time and effort in making sure that photographers, when they come to our camps, are very well accommodated. And I think that that stems from our owners of our company, Derek and Beverly Joubert, who are National Geographic explorers at large. And many of the iconic wildlife films that you might have seen growing up on National Geographic were done by them. So they're very, very familiar with photography and videography, and want to offer that same experience to our guests.
I love that very much. You know, my trip to Botswana with you was really epic. I really loved it very much. And I thought, you know, the experience was just epic. I don't think I'm ever going to get over it. I loved the elephants so much there. It was spectacular. But maybe we should have a conversation about family and family travel with Great Plains. So, how would something like that work for people who have never been? Maybe you have a grandparents who want to take their kids and grandkids or something like that. Can you do a full buyout of a camp, or can you do things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can do full buyouts of the camps. Our camps are really nice because they're small and intimate. So our camps vary from just 3 or 4 rooms to a camp. That's like 6 to 8 guests. Up until about our biggest camp will be El Doño at 9 rooms. So they're small, intimate, but it does allow you the opportunity to take a multi-generational family out and take over the whole camp. If it's just a couple with their kids, we're also able to accommodate that because every single reserve level camp and some of our explorer level camps as well have family rooms or family suites. And those come with, a private butler, private chef, private guide, and they're set a little bit back from the rest of the camp so that you're separated from some of the other guests. Not that they're ever very busy, being small camps as they are. It allows you to have dinner in your own villa or your own family suite as a small family together. So, yes, we go to huge lengths to accommodate families and make sure that they have a fantastic time. There's nothing better than traveling to Africa with your family and
Yeah,
and seeing Africa through your kids' eyes. I've done it myself, and I continue to do it, even though my kids are grown now. There's nothing they love more than going to Africa, and I can tell you now that the greatest gift you can give your kids, in my opinion, is the gift of travel. Uh,
I
forget
agree.
about forget about jewelry and money and all the monetary stuff. The gift of travel is something that lasts forever with your kids. And if I ask my kids today, what's the best thing you've ever given me? They will always say, without a doubt, trips to Africa.
I love it. I agree. So let's talk about Botswana now. Let's get into Botswana. You know, people hear about it all the time. What, in your opinion, makes Botswana different than all the other countries in Africa?
Well, first up, it's definitely the most expensive safari option you can do. So that's going to be a consideration. But
Why is that?
it's expensive because it's so unique. It is one of the most sparsely populated countries on our planet. There's only 2 million people in a country that's basically almost the size of Texas. So it's massive. It's got incredible natural resources and very few people. So when you go to Botswana, it's not like going to East Africa or to Kenya, which is your quintessential typical African safari, because you're able to combine both the water element as well as the land element. So the Okavango Delta is one of the natural wonders of the world, and it comes down, the floods come down every April through to end of October, November, every single year in Africa. And the opportunity to get on a dugout canoe or a makoro, as we call it in Botswana, or a boat or a pontoon is just unforgettable. And combine that water experience with the land experience and the typical game drives that you would do in a place like East Africa. So it makes it very, very special. And I can tell you, seeing two male lions running through the Okavango Delta right towards your vehicle with that crystal clear water spraying as they run past the vehicle, or elephants at a pool party in the water in the Okavango Delta is just something so special from boat that you just can't get from a vehicle.
Yeah, I agree. I love it with all my heart. I was there over Easter, and one of the things I really loved, I was in a Makoro, and we had lions that were sleeping up in the tree, and we went right underneath them. And at first, I was a little nervous, and then we just stopped. I asked the puller in the Makoro just to stop, and we sat for maybe 5 or 6 minutes until he said, "Come on, it's time to go. They're looking at us too." So it was like, all right. I got nervous, but I really loved that experience and being that close. And I also loved the big elephants that were there too. They were so huge and they were curious. They would come up to us. And
Did you see the bulls digging up those water lilies and eating
yeah,
them,
I have
the
some
roots?
videos of them. I should send you.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was really, really special. I mean, I guess they're like big sweet potatoes, when they
yeah,
pull them out.
yeah.
Yeah. And so I love them very much. It was really magical. And I thought Celinda was one of my favorite places I've ever been. I fell in love with that property very much. Yeah. I think Botswana is really a special, special way to go. And so you've got how many camps there now? Because there's a new one that just opened recently. Or was it
Yeah,
last
so
year?
so we've got 18 camps across our portfolio.
18.
Yeah, some of them newer, some of them not so new. And that's depending, that's including all the new stuff that's coming as well. So yeah, it's quite a nice varied portfolio. Our biggest footprint would be Botswana, Kenya, and now obviously Zimbabwe as well. We're starting to invest in Zimbabwe because it's also a wonderful destination. Zimbabwe is like a really good, affordable alternative to Botswana, which offers you the water activities as well as the land activities.
On the
So
Zambezi.
on the Zambezi, yeah. So I'm a huge fan of Zimbabwe and combining, the Wangi area with Victoria Falls and then with the lower Zambezi region, which is the Mana Pools area. Just so wild. It's so untainted by human influence. It's just a fantastic place to go as an alternative to Botswana. So
So
those
how
three
would you get
countries are
there?
where our main focus is.
Yeah, how would you fly in? Where would you fly into to start an itinerary like?
So if you're going from the States, for example, it's probably easiest to fly into Johannesburg, spend a night at a beautiful hotel in Johannesburg, and then head up to Victoria Falls, spend a few nights at the falls, and then from there you'd fly into Wangi, and from Wangi then into Mana Pools, and then back to Vic Falls and out to Johannesburg, or you could fly into Harare and go into Harare, which is the capital city of Zimbabwe, and then connect into Johannesburg as well. And all those flights are short, they're definitely under 2 hours. So it's like taking a regional flight in the States or going from,
Mhm.
West Palm Beach to New York. It's very manageable, even though they're cross-country flights, a lot of them. So very, very easy. Access is great, and you can easily combine a Botswana or a Zimbabwe itinerary with Cape Town. Let's not forget about Cape Town in South Africa. Super nice to have that city experience, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's my home city, so I'm a little
Yeah.
bit biased. And I think the two of us will see each other there in May this year.
Yes. Yeah, we're
Um,
gonna go to the show. It'll be fun.
and great to spend spend 4 nights at the end of a safari and go and sip on some wine in the winelands and
You're
see the
right.
beautiful beaches and Table Mountain and Robben Island and learn about the history and the culture. You know, it's very important, if I might just mention to your viewers and your listeners here, is that a lot of people go to Africa for the wildlife, but they end up coming back for the people because nobody, in my opinion, does hospitality better than Africans. And it sounds counterintuitive. Everybody thinks of Africa as this dark continent that's kind of third world, but you will never have the kind of hospitality that you have in Africa in places like Europe or the United States, in my opinion. I think it's the very best hospitality in the world.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Let's go back to Kenya. Let's talk about being active. Part of the appeal is to see the wildlife, but then, I have ADHD and I want to be busy all the time. And if I have to do game drives all day, I mean, I like to go on one or two in the morning and get out and go, but I don't want to be in the vehicle the whole time looking at game. I want to do other things. I like to be on foot. I like to do a lot of fun stuff. So, let's talk about how active you can be.
Oh, you can be as active or as inactive as you like. And we recognize that there are people that don't want to spend a lot of time day in and day out on game drives, that they want to get out in the middle of the day and do something. All of our rooms have opportunity to exercise. Our camps sometimes have gyms in them. But then also, and you've experienced this, you go to a place like Old Donyo, you can get out there and go horse riding. You can go mountain biking. You can also do that at Mara Expedition in Kenya. You can go and ride on mountain bikes. We love taking our guests on walks, scenic walks, getting off the vehicle. It's amazing how different you feel in the African bush if you're on a bike or a horse or on foot versus from the safety of a vehicle. Suddenly, all your senses are aroused. You're noticing the smaller things in the bush. You're learning, oh my gosh, that looks like a lion track. And suddenly, all your senses come to life again because our senses get dulled when we live in cities. And when you step foot in Africa, you suddenly realize that for millions of years, we've been part of the natural environment. We've just chosen ourselves to separate ourselves more from nature. And I think that there's coming back to the family thing that you mentioned earlier. So many of our kids today suffer from what's called nature deficit disorder,
Wow, that's a
because
thing.
of yeah, because of being on iPhones and iPads and computers and TVs the whole time, that they actually lose their connection with nature. And so
Wow,
going on
that
an
breaks my
African
heart.
safari, yeah,
Wow. I mean, really,
yeah,
because, growing up as a kid, like we were blessed to live in Alaska and Montana and all these great places. And my grandpa
yeah.
was my best friend. He took me everywhere. And
And
my
you would go
dad,
fishing all the time,
everywhere.
and yeah,
Yeah. I love being outside. And now that I'm living in Colorado, like I'm so blessed to be here too. Like I just can't imagine not being outside, like not being in nature. I mean, I love to go to the cities too, but just for a short time, I have to get out. I can't stay there forever. I don't know how people do.
yeah.
But it's what I get frustrated with is when you find someone who thinks that we're crazy because we want to do what we do, right? And then they come into our world and they're scared of it. And so how would you convert someone who's afraid to come on safari or afraid to even consider this? How would you convince them to come out and try it?
I think you've got to convince people by encouraging them to step right in out of their comfort zones and do something that they've never done before, perhaps, and get out there and experience it. And I say this quite often, but traveling to Africa is for many people, almost everybody, a very spiritual experience. The moment their feet touch African ground and they smell that very specific smell of Africa after the rains, for example, which, it's a mixture
Amazing.
of grasses and herbs and dirt and animal dung. It's this like sweet smell which permeates your nasal membranes, and suddenly you think, "Wow, this is like an epiphany, a very spiritual experience." And I put it down to the fact that Africa doesn't belong to Africans. It belongs to the whole of humanity. All of us came from Africa, whether you live in Scandinavia, whether you live in India, whether you live in Australia, or whether you live in the United States. So Africa is home to all of us. It's our birthplace. And so when you step foot in Africa, you're coming home. So I would encourage anybody that's skeptical or nervous about going to Africa, what's there to be worried about going home for a vacation? I mean,
That's
we
true.
love
That's a
going
good
home.
point. Yeah.
So
Oh my
so go
gosh.
home, go home, leave your fears behind, and you'll be rejuvenated. You'll have a very spiritual experience, and I promise you, if you're not too old, you will be back because Africa is not a destination where you go to once. The continent is so vast. The differences between the Okavango in Botswana and the Maasai Mara in Kenya and Mana pools in Zimbabwe and then the deserts of Namibia. I mean, there's just so much on the continent. It's very diverse and it allows you to come back time and time again. Ralph, if I told you that some of our travelers have been to Africa on trips, paid trips, 50, 60 times.
That's crazy.
It's just amazing. And in 20 years. So people are taking 3 or 4 trips to Africa, those that can afford it. I don't know how they do, but they do somehow. But it's just testament to how incredible the continent is, how varied it is, and the hospitality is just unbelievable. But most importantly, you feel home when you're there. You feel as though you're coming home.
Let me ask you a question. So, since you've been with Great Plains now, how many years have you worked there now? You've been there a long time.
5 years.
5 years. What's been your favorite camp that you visit? Your absolute favorite?
My favorite camp in all of Africa, and I'm not just saying this because I work for Great Plains now, is definitely Old Donyo, and that is in Kenya. And you mentioned it earlier as well, sometimes called Old Donyo Was, but it is a fantastic scenic camp. It doesn't have the wildlife viewing of the Maasai Mara or anything
Sure.
like that. I think you need to combine it with a strong wildlife experience, but it's just such a spiritually beautiful place to be able to sit there in the shadow of Mount Kilimanjaro and watch some of the remaining super tusker elephants come and drink feet from you from one of those hides.
How old
And
are
you
those elephants?
Oh, they're in their 50s, sometimes early 60s. You know, bull elephants, they live long. All elephants live long, but the elephants don't die of old age in the wild. They die mostly of starvation because they're on their last set of teeth. And as that last set gets worn down, they're forced to feed mainly on grass and they lose condition over time and eventually succumb naturally. But they such stunning elephants. I mean, to see an elephant with 9 foot long tusks dragging on the ground is not something you can see anymore. There's only about 20, maybe 25 of those individuals left, and Oldonyo is the best place to see them.
Wow, that's incredible. I know when we were there, we went into the blind and we spent hours and hours with them, and it was kind of it reminded me of like I was trying to compare it to like when you go to Florence and see the old guys in the park playing chess and they're all in their 80s, hanging out, having lunch and fighting with each other, and they've been fighting since they're 10 years old or 8 years old, and they've been best friends and they've never left. It was like I got that same feeling from all the Ellies. They all came for lunch. We sat for hours with nothing happening, just waiting and waiting, being patient, relaxing. And we didn't even hear them come. They're silent. It's so funny. These huge, massive elephants, 17 feet tall, come out of nowhere. And then pretty soon there's a foot. There they are at the water. And one of them took his trunk and like smelled, and he knew we were sitting in there. They know we're there.
But yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
but it was like, my God, this is massive. And I mean, like his foot, was right next to the blind and he's standing right next to us. And here comes the others. And it was like, hi, Fred. Oh, hi, Marty. And there they are, like, and knocking each other around a little bit with their tusks and hanging out and, kicking dirt. And it was just fun to be in their world for a
Yeah.
minute. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing you draw that analogy because it's almost like they'll see each other at the watering hole and they're like, you know, you cheated at backgammon last week, and they'll
Uh-huh.
give them a
I
big
just feel
nudge,
that.
and like they really are, and they all know each other. You know,
Mhm.
the elephants are sentient beings. They're self-aware like we are as humans. They're one of the only creatures that are self-aware, and just like the great apes, chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, the whales and dolphins, cetaceans, and elephants and ourselves are the
Yeah.
only sort of creatures that have been scientifically proven to be self-aware. And so when elephants, next time you're on safari and you see elephants, standing at a watering hole and some of them are drinking, some of them might actually be looking at their reflection and going, "Ooh, I look handsome today," or "Gee, I've got to fix my eyebrows this morning," or
Right.
something like that. So,
Isn't it
they're
funny?
incredible, and you really get those insights when you sit in a hide versus on a vehicle, and you can actually spend quality time at it. That's why I love Old Donya so much, because when you're on a safari vehicle, you're moving, and yes, you'll stop and you'll enjoy the sightings, and it's great. But when you can sit for 3, 4 hours with elephant bulls and get insights into their behavior and their personality, that's what I value the most. And that's why I love slowing down and being at a place like Old Donya in Kenya.
I agree. I think taking the time to stop for your life for a minute and just be in their world, it's such a privilege. I think I feel so lucky. I was going to ask you, so tell me about the new helicopter that flies out from Aldonio now, the new flight that you guys are doing. I had some clients recently on it, and they didn't know what to expect and they had a really good time. But maybe you could share with your listeners what's new.
Yeah, sure. So helicopters are both a blessing and a curse in Africa, I would say. There's some parts where there's heli flights all the time, and they're going back and forth in certain areas, and it's a little bit disconcerting. It's almost like having a bunch of drones sort of flying above you all the time, which we're familiar with these days and in today's world. But In most cases, in most areas, those helicopter flights are very well controlled. And so you want to send people to areas where the helicopter flights are controlled. Having said that, there's nothing better than viewing the African landscape from a helicopter versus a fixed wing plane. Because you're able to hover, it's almost like being on kind of like a hot air balloon experience, where you're not going as fast necessarily, and you're able to descend at altitude and go higher. It's a very very unique experience, and also the big difference between fixed wings and helicopters is that you can land anywhere almost,
Right.
and so you can go on a scenic helicopter flight from Oldonyo, for example, and go and land 30 minutes into your flight and go and have a champagne breakfast somewhere on the plane. The pilot will just pick a nice spot to land. And that's just fantastic, not having to rely on airstrips and everything. So I'm a big fan of helicopters, but I'm also a big fan of keeping them controlled so we don't have our airspace littered with helicopters everywhere we go in Africa.
So can you also share with the listeners about when you travel to some of these camps? I mean, we're flying to Botswana. We fly from Cape Town or from Maun, or from Victoria Falls, right? Sorry, from Cape Town or Johannesburg right into Maun, and then we will connect to a bush flight to take us out into the Okavango Delta. But we can also do that with helicopters too, right? So we can actually
Correct.
arrive and transfer into the helicopter and land right at the camp.
Yeah, absolutely. So the choice is entirely up to your guests. You know, there are people that are scared of helicopters that won't get on them. I'm not one of them. But the choice is entirely up to your guests whether they prefer fixed wing or they prefer a helicopter. Yes, we can. In most cases, almost every country, we can organize a helicopter flight into camp versus a fixed wing flight.
And can you do flight seeing along the way? Like, I mean, when we were on ours, our captain took us really low so we could go right over the elephants, which I thought was really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I always like having a scenic flight on an itinerary, but it's not 100% necessary because, for example, when you're flying into the Okavango Delta, you are, I mean, part of the greatest amazement for guests is the flight in to the camps because you're flying over this massive waterway. You're not seeing a single person or evidence of people, and it's just like you're in. It's like step going back in time, like hundreds of years. It's just wildlife. You're spotting elephants and giraffe and hippos and crocs from the air. It's absolutely stunning. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I love that. So let's talk about
yeah.
seasons. Like, Botswana seems to be, I don't know that a lot of people know much about Botswana. So I like to go in the kind of the shoulder season. I don't like to go during the peak season, but maybe we could kind of talk about what it's like year round and what the differences are.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think the very best time, and it's always been called the secret season for Botswana, but it's not so secret anymore if I look at our availability. But the very best time, in my opinion, is from late May into early June, before the high season pricing kicks in at our camps on June 15th. Because you're getting all the benefits of the winter season. The Okavango's in flood. You've got nice, cool temperatures in the evenings, mild temperatures in the day, and the wildlife's so active. You've got all the migratory birds, which are still sticking around or getting ready to leave. And it's a beautiful, beautiful time to go. The high season in Africa is largely dictated by the American travel season, which we all know is from, June through to September.
When the kids are out of
And that's,
school.
yeah, when the kids are out of school and you've got, all those holidays and everything in the United States. So it's not necessarily the very best time to be in Africa, although it is gorgeous. But if you want to get away from the crowd slightly, you want to get good value for your safari, and you have the flexibility to travel at any time of the year. I always recommend those shoulder seasons as the best times. But having said that, a quick reminder to everybody that Africa is a year-round destination. You can go at any time of the year and you're going to have the most fantastic experience. Summer is incredible. I'm talking about the African summer, which is obviously our winter. Um, But if you're going in December, January, February, everything is verdant and green. Yes, you might get thunder showers or thunderstorms in the afternoons, but the vehicles are covered and everything comes out after the rain comes down. And you've got baby animals everywhere. So there's really no bad time to be in Africa. It just depends when you're able to travel and also what your budget is.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think any day in Africa is better than any day here. I love safaris with all my heart. I can't wait to go this year. Yeah. What are some of the conservation projects that you guys are working on recently that you're helping?
Oh my gosh, Ralph, there's too many to list here, but I'll mention just a few. One of our most ambitious projects at the moment is called Project Rewild, and it's all about rewilding landscapes across Africa that have had extinctions of certain species or very low numbers of charismatic species of wildlife like elephants, rhino, lions, wild dogs, etc. And our ambition there is to take wildlife from areas where they are doing very well, where they're almost overpopulated some areas, and take them into these areas in which the populations have either been declining or in which certain species have become extinct. And it's a very ambitious project. For example, in the last 2 years, we've moved 101 elephants from a park in Zimbabwe to the Mana Pools area, where elephant numbers have declined over the years. And it's really giving all these animals a second chance, but it's also ensuring that Africa's populations of wildlife are bolstered by areas in which they are doing well. Because there's precious few areas where the wildlife numbers are actually increasing. On a whole, we've seen elephant numbers drop, big cats numbers drop drastically in the last 100 years, sometimes by as much as 90-95%. It's astounding what's happening. So it's our duty to really protect that. So that's just one of the many projects, but we do a lot with communities as well. So building schools, education, feeding school kids, access to water for communities, because a lot of people think about the wildlife and how important it is to protect them. But if we don't safeguard the livelihoods of communities that live alongside wildlife, they're going to be encouraged to possibly do some subsistence poaching, to get paid by ivory poachers, to get involved in that terrible game. And we want to dissuade that. And the only way you do that is by making the lives of those people that live alongside wildlife a little bit better. So we place equal commitment on the communities as we do on the wild.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what would make you different than, say, someone else? Like working with Great Plains, it's dear to my heart. I love all the work you do. I love the people that work there. I love the communities that support the camps. I love the whole DNA of what you do. But what would separate you from others? What makes you different than what others do or
Yeah, sure.
differentiates
I
you?
mean, look, there's so many of our what I like to call friendly competitors in the industry that are also doing fantastic work, and I'm reluctant to say that we're so different as though we are sort of the benchmark because I don't want to belittle the great work that everybody's doing in Africa that are responsible and doing good jobs. I think the main differences between us and some of our competitors are that our camps are really small, intimate. Um, we don't also take, is an important thing, is we don't take direct bookings from a consumer. So you cannot just get online and book directly with Great Plains. You have to book through your travel advisor because we believe that we want a small team of people that can assist the experts, who are the likes of you, Ralph,
Right.
to develop your businesses and work through. And your clients can then speak to somebody on the same time zone who knows Africa well, knows our camps well, and it's a much more efficient process than dealing with somebody in Africa. And a lot of these companies have, they deal direct with consumers in the United States and they're based in Africa. The time makes it very difficult. It's just nice to speak to somebody in the same language, in the same time zone, who can really get you confident about traveling to Africa. So those are some of the major differences. Another difference I touched on earlier is that we're in some of the best wildlife areas in Africa, but with a caveat there in that we like to be in private concessions where we can give your guests private access to wildlife versus dealing with the maddening crowds in some areas in Africa.
That's amazing. Let's talk about your guides briefly. You know, you have a network of guides and people that are just brilliant. I haven't met such educated people ever in my life. That I
Yeah.
mean, one of my wildlife guides, I swear, he knew the DNA of every leaf to every piece of grass. I mean, I just on and on and on. It was brilliant. I loved them very much, and they were so passionate. And I thought, how do you do this every single day, over and over and over? I mean, and he treated us like we had never like we were his very first guest, and it was just so much enthusiasm. Like what goes behind all of
Well, a lot of training, and in fact, one of my roles at Great Plains is to facilitate all our guide training. And I've got to be honest and say that, I learn as much, if not more, from our guides than I impart to them. And the reason for that is that they are the guys on the ground. They are the guys that have been out tracking cattle for their fathers, from young boys. I mean, it's amazing. You'll go to Africa and you'll be driving around the Maasai Mara and you'll see like an 8-year-old boy with a stick and a herd of cattle in the middle of nowhere, and you'll drive around the next corner and there's a pride of lions, and you're like, this is bizarre. But this is how these guides grow up. They grow up in nature with a passion for wildlife. They know how to track wildlife because they track their cattle every day, and they track lions, and they make sure that their cattle is safe from other wildlife. And so it's a passion, and it's ingrained and inbuilt into almost every rural African. Some just decide to carry on in the cattle industry, and others decide to go into nature and tourism, which is a perfect segue from tracking cattle as a young boy to being a guide.
That's
And
incredible.
I think our guides have, the biggest ingredient to being a good guide is passion, and being able to tell stories and interpret wildlife, and the natural world for your guests. And I think if you can cross that sort of the cultural boundary that exists between Africans and, let's say, Americans, and you're able to speak good English, you can really blow people away by your knowledge of the African bush, and also your stories about particular wildlife species and what you've learned from them over time.
Nice. I love that. Well, I got to tell you, James, I've loved being with you today, and I appreciate you sharing all this wisdom about Great Plains with our listeners today. And you know, you're one of my favorite people in the whole world, and I love your brand, and I love booking my clients on your safari. So we have a lot to look forward to, and I just really wanted to give the listeners a different perspective of why I choose who I work with so different than everybody else. And I think they kind of got that message today. So thank you. It means a lot.
Yeah, likewise, Ralph. It's been a pleasure chatting to you and your listeners, and nobody better, everybody out there. Ralph is not only is he a hell of a funny, but he really goes the extra mile for each and every one of you. So we look forward to welcoming you all to Africa at some stage, and Ralph, hopefully we'll meet up soon, and I can do some fishing with you
Sounds good.
in the mountains somewhere.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, James.
Sounds good. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned a lot. If adventure calls you, don't hesitate to reach out to the expeditionist. I can't wait to explore with you. Your adventure awaits.